Sarah Mitchell pulled her truck into the gas station on the outskirts of Millbrook, Texas, just as the sun was setting. It had been a long drive from Virginia, and she still had another 100 miles to go before reaching her father's ranch. In the passenger seat, her German Shepherd, Ranger, lifted his head and looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes. "Just a quick stop, boy," Sarah said, reaching over to scratch behind his ears. "Stretch our legs, fill up the tank, and we're back on the road." She was 34 years old, with short dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a worn jacket, nothing that would draw attention. That's exactly how she wanted it. After 12 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to make it through the program, Sarah was used to people underestimating her. She was 5'6", lean but muscular, with a quiet way of moving that most people didn't notice. But she noticed everything. It was training that never turned off. As she stepped out of the truck, she saw the police cruiser parked on the other side of the pumps. 2 officers sat inside, watching her. Sarah didn't think much of it at first. Small-town cops were often bored, and a stranger passing through was probably the most interesting thing they'd see all day. She let Ranger out of the truck, keeping him on his leash. The dog stretched, then stayed close to her side as she filled the tank. Ranger was 7 years old, a military working dog who'd served 3 tours with her in Afghanistan. When he'd been retired from service, Sarah had adopted him. They'd been through too much together to be separated. The gas pump clicked off. Sarah replaced the nozzle and was heading inside to pay when the police cruiser pulled up behind her truck, blocking her in. 2 officers got out. The first was a big man, maybe 6'3", with a beer gut straining against his uniform shirt. His name tag read Dwyer. The second officer was younger and thinner, nervous looking. His tag said Morton. "Evening, ma'am," Dwyer said, his tone already dismissive. "License and registration." Sarah kept her voice calm and polite. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I asked for license and registration," Dwyer repeated, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. "Don't make me ask again." Sarah glanced at Morton, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Something was wrong here. She'd been pulled over before, everyone had, but this felt different. Still, she knew better than to escalate. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket for her wallet. "Hands where I can see them." Dwyer barked, suddenly aggressive. Sarah froze, then slowly pulled out her wallet with 2 fingers, making every movement visible. "I'm just getting my license, like you asked." Dwyer snatched the wallet from her hand and pulled out her license, barely glancing at it. "Virginia plates. Long way from home. What's your business in Millbrook?" "Just passing through," Sarah said. "My father has a ranch about 100 miles south. I'm visiting him." "Aha." Dwyer looked at Ranger, who sat calmly at Sarah's side. "That's a big dog. He vicious?" "He's trained," Sarah said carefully. "But he's not aggressive unless there's a threat." "Looks aggressive to me," Dwyer said. He turned to Morton. "Call animal control. This dog isn't properly restrained." "He's on a leash," Sarah pointed out, keeping her voice level. "And he's under my control. There's no violation here." "I decide what's a violation," Dwyer said, stepping closer. "And I say that dog is dangerous." "Morton, make the call." Morton hesitated. "Chief, the dog's just sitting there. It hasn't done anything." "Did I ask for your opinion?" Dwyer snapped. "Make the call, or you'll be back on traffic duty for the next month." Sarah's mind was racing. This wasn't about her dog. Something else was happening here. She'd learned to read situations in combat zones, and every instinct was telling her this was wrong. "Officer Dwyer," she said, keeping her tone respectful but firm. "I don't want any trouble. If there's an actual problem with my vehicle or my documents, I'm happy to address it. But my dog hasn't threatened anyone, and I'd appreciate it if we could handle this professionally. Dwyer's face reddened. You telling me how to do my job? No, sir. I'm just trying to understand what the problem is. The problem, Dwyer said, stepping so close she could smell coffee and tobacco on his breath, is that you're a stranger in my town with an attitude. Now, I'm going to search your vehicle. If you resist, I'll arrest you for obstruction. Do you have probable cause for a search? Sarah asked. Big mistake. She saw it immediately in Dwyer's eyes. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by a woman. Morton, restrain the dog, Dwyer ordered. I'm searching the vehicle. Sir, you can't just, Sarah started. Put your hands on the truck, Dwyer commanded. Now. Sarah complied, her jaw tight. Ranger sensed her tension and stood up, alert but not aggressive. Morton approached nervously with a catch pole, the kind animal control used for dangerous animals. Don't touch my dog with that, Sarah said, her voice harder now. He's not a stray. He's a trained military working dog, and he's under my control. Military, huh? Dwyer laughed. Let me guess. You one of those women who think they can do a man's job. Probably washed out of basic training and now you're pretending you served. Sarah said nothing. She'd heard it all before. The doubts, the mockery, the assumption that women didn't belong in combat. She'd proven herself 1,000 times over in the field, but to men like Dwyer, none of that mattered. Search the truck, Dwyer told Morton. I bet we find something interesting. As Morton reluctantly began searching Sarah's truck, Dwyer kept talking. You know what I think? I think you're probably running drugs. Pretty common these days. Nice-looking woman, nobody suspects her, driving cross-country with a cover story about visiting family. I'm not running drugs, Sarah said flatly. We'll see about that. Dwyer pulled open the back door of the truck's cab. Sarah's duffel bag sat on the back seat, the one with her military gear, her medals, her discharge papers. But Dwyer wasn't interested in looking through it properly. He grabbed the bag and dumped its contents onto the ground. Clothes scattered across the pavement. Her uniform fell out, along with a framed photo of her SEAL team. Dwyer kicked through the items like they were garbage. What's this? Playing dress up? Sarah's hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From barely controlled rage. That uniform represented 12 years of her life. It represented brothers and sisters in arms, some of whom hadn't made it home. It represented every drop of blood, sweat, and tears she'd given to her country. And this small-town bully was treating it like trash. That's my service uniform, Sarah said, her voice ice-cold. I'm a veteran. That's protected property under federal law. A veteran, Dwyer mocked. Sure you are, sweetheart. And I'm the president. Morton had stopped searching the truck. He was staring at the uniform on the ground, at the photo of the SEAL team. Chief, he said quietly. Maybe we should. Shut up, Morton. Dwyer turned back to Sarah. You know what I think happened here? I think you stole these items. Stolen valor, it's called. That's a federal crime. He was baiting her. Sarah realized that now. This wasn't about drugs or her dog or anything else. Dwyer was looking for an excuse to arrest her, to put her in her place. Maybe he did this to every stranger who passed through. Maybe he specifically targeted women. Either way, he'd picked the wrong person. But Sarah couldn't show her hand. Not yet. If she told them she was actually a Navy SEAL, they'd just laugh harder. Or worse, they'd escalate, trying to prove she was lying. She needed to stay calm, document everything, and get out of this situation without it turning violent. Officer Dwyer, she said, I can prove my service record. I have documents. I don't care about your fake documents, Dwyer interrupted. Turn around. You're under arrest for stolen valor, possession of a dangerous animal, and resisting an officer. I haven't resisted anything, Sarah protested. You're resisting right now. Dwyer grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back roughly. Pain shot through Sarah's shoulder, not enough to injure her, but enough to hurt. She could have broken his grip easily. Could have had him on the ground in 2 seconds. But that would only make things worse. Ranger barked, moving toward Dwyer protectively. That dog just threatened an officer. Dwyer shouted. Morton, shoot it. No. Sarah yelled. Everything happened in slow motion. Morton drew his weapon, his hands shaking. Ranger was barking but not attacking, just trying to protect Sarah like he'd been trained to do. Sarah wrenched free from Dwyer's grip and put herself between Ranger and the gun. Don't you dare, she said, her voice deadly quiet. That dog is a decorated veteran. He's saved more lives than you've ever helped. If you shoot him, I will make sure everyone knows what happened here. I will ruin you. For a moment, Morton hesitated. He looked at Sarah, at the uniform on the ground, at the photo of the SEAL team. Something in his face changed, maybe respect, maybe doubt. But Dwyer had gone too far to back down now. Morton, I gave you an order. Before anyone could move, headlights swept across the gas station. Another vehicle was pulling in, a civilian car, but the driver who stepped out was clearly law enforcement. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a weathered face. He wore civilian clothes, but he moved with authority. What's going on here? The man asked, his voice calm but commanding. Police business, Dwyer said. Move along. The man looked at the scene, Sarah in handcuffs, her belongings scattered on the ground, Ranger barking, Morton with his gun drawn. Then he saw the uniform. And the photo. His eyes widened slightly. He walked over and picked up the photo, studying it carefully. Then he looked at Sarah, really looked at her, comparing her face to one of the figures in the photo. Officer Dwyer, the man said quietly. I'm going to need you to release this woman immediately. And who the hell are you? Dwyer demanded. The man pulled out a badge. Retired FBI Special Agent James Crawford. And unless I'm very mistaken, you just assaulted a decorated Navy SEAL. The tension at the gas station was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officer Dwyer's face had gone from red to pale in the space of a heartbeat. Morton had lowered his weapon, looking relieved and terrified at the same time. James Crawford held up the photo of Sarah's SEAL team, then looked at her again. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. SEAL Team 3. I remember reading about you in the agency briefings. First woman to complete 3 combat deployments with the SEALs. Silver Star recipient. He turned to Dwyer. And you just tried to arrest her for stolen valor? I didn't know, Dwyer stammered. You didn't ask, Crawford corrected coldly. You saw a woman traveling alone and decided to flex your authority. How many times have you done this, Officer Dwyer? How many innocent people have you harassed in this town? That's not, I was just doing my job. Your job is to serve and protect, Crawford said. Not to bully travelers and threaten to shoot their service dogs. He walked over to Sarah. Are you injured, Lieutenant? I'm fine, Sarah said, though her shoulder was throbbing where Dwyer had wrenched it. But I want to file a formal complaint. This wasn't proper procedure. This was harassment. Dwyer's eyes darted nervously between Sarah and Crawford. Now, let's not be hasty. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Sarah said flatly. You searched my vehicle without probable cause. You destroyed my personal property. You threatened to shoot my dog. And you physically assaulted me. All of that is on the gas station security camera. She pointed to the camera mounted above the pumps. She'd noticed at the moment she pulled in, situational awareness was second nature to her. Dwyer's face went pale again. Morton looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Crawford pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the county sheriff. This needs to be handled by someone with oversight over the Millbrook PD." He glanced at Sarah. "With your permission, I'd also like to contact a friend of mine at the FBI field office in Houston. This might be part of a larger pattern." "A larger pattern?" Sarah asked. Crawford nodded grimly. "I've been hearing rumors about Millbrook for the past year. Travelers getting stopped for bogus reasons, searched illegally, sometimes arrested on false charges. A few cases where people claimed money or valuables went missing after these stops. But nobody's been willing to come forward officially, and the county hasn't investigated. Because we're a small town," Dwyer said quickly. "Sometimes we're more cautious with strangers. That's not a crime." "Being cautious is fine," Crawford said. "Violating constitutional rights isn't. And threatening to kill a service dog? That's going to get you more than a reprimand, Officer Dwyer." As Crawford made his calls, Sarah bent down to gather her scattered belongings. Ranger pressed against her leg, still alert but calming down now that the immediate threat had passed. She picked up her uniform carefully, brushing off the dirt, folding it with the respect it deserved. Morton approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up earlier. I knew this wasn't right." Sarah looked at him. He was young, maybe 25, with guilt written all over his face. She could see he wasn't like Dwyer, he was just scared of his boss, scared of losing his job. "Why didn't you?" Sarah asked quietly. Morton glanced at Dwyer, who was now pacing nervously near his cruiser. "Chief Dwyer runs this department. The mayor's his cousin. If you cross him, you're done in this town. I've got a wife and a baby on the way. I can't afford to lose this job." "So you were willing to shoot my dog to keep your job?" Sarah asked. Morton flinched. "No. I wasn't going to shoot. I was just stalling, hoping something would happen to stop this." He looked at her desperately. "I know that's not good enough. I know I should have done more. But I'm not like him, ma'am. I swear I'm not." Sarah wanted to be angry with him, but she'd seen this before. Good people staying silent because they were afraid. It didn't excuse what happened, but she understood it. "If you're not like him," Sarah said, "then you need to tell the truth about what's been happening in this town. All of it. Because I guarantee this isn't the first time Dwyer's done something like this." Morton nodded slowly. "There have been incidents. People complained, but nothing ever came of it. The mayor always backed up Chief Dwyer." "Not anymore," Crawford said, walking back over. "Sheriff's on his way. So is my friend from the FBI. They'll want to hear everything." Dwyer must have overheard, because he suddenly became aggressive again. "You people have no jurisdiction here. This is a local matter." "Federal civil rights violations are not a local matter," Crawford said calmly. "And if there's a pattern of corruption in your department, that definitely falls under federal jurisdiction." "I'm not corrupt," Dwyer shouted. "I'm just doing my job in a tough environment. You have no idea what it's like policing a small town near the border. We get all kinds of criminals passing through." "I'm not a criminal," Sarah said. "I'm a decorated veteran traveling to visit my father. But you assumed I was guilty of something because I'm a woman traveling alone. That's profiling, Officer Dwyer. And it's illegal." Dwyer opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He turned to Morton. "Don't say anything to these people. We have a union lawyer." "I'm going to tell the truth," Morton interrupted, his voice shaking but determined. "I'm done covering for you, Chief." Dwyer's face went red again. "You're done in this town, Morton. I'll make sure you never work in law enforcement again." "Maybe that's for the best," Morton said quietly. 20 minutes later, the county sheriff arrived, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Reeves. She listened to Sarah's account with a grim expression, took photographs of Sarah's scattered belongings and the marks on her shoulder, and made notes about the security camera. Then the FBI agent arrived, Special Agent Marcus Chen. He was younger than Crawford, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that took in everything. Crawford must have given him the background, because he went straight to Morton. "Officer Morton, I understand you're willing to cooperate with our investigation." Morton glanced at Dwyer one more time, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll tell you everything I know." Over the next hour, the story came out. Millbrook had a serious corruption problem. Chief Dwyer had been targeting travelers for years, searching vehicles illegally, confiscating cash and valuables under bogus, civil forfeiture laws, even planting evidence when he needed to justify an arrest. The mayor knew about it and looked the other way because Dwyer gave him a cut of the seized assets. Morton wasn't directly involved in the worst of it, but he'd witnessed plenty. He'd kept quiet out of fear, but seeing Dwyer try to force him to shoot a service dog had been the breaking point. "How many people?" Sarah asked. "How many travelers has he done this to?" "Dozens," Morton admitted. "Maybe more. Most of them just paid the fine or had their property seized and left town. A few got arrested on bogus charges. Those cases usually got dropped eventually, but by then the person had spent money on lawyers and bail." Sheriff Reeves looked disgusted. "Why didn't anyone report this to my office?" "Dwyer told people there was no point," Morton said. "He said you wouldn't believe some out-of-town stranger over a local police chief. And he was usually right. The few complaints that did get filed went nowhere." "That ends now," Reeves said firmly. She turned to Dwyer. "Chief Dwyer, you're suspended immediately pending investigation. Hand over your badge and weapon." "You can't suspend me," Dwyer protested. "I haven't been convicted of anything." "I can and I am," Reeves said. "And if you resist, I'll arrest you right here for assault and battery on Lieutenant Mitchell." For a moment, it looked like Dwyer might fight. Then he seemed to deflate. He handed over his badge and gun, his hands shaking. "This isn't over," he muttered. "The mayor. The mayor is going to have his own problems," Agent Chen said. "Federal civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit theft, obstruction of justice, I can think of half a dozen charges that might apply here. And that's before we audit the department's financials and seized asset records." As Dwyer was led away by Sheriff Reeves, not under arrest yet, but definitely not free to leave, Sarah finally let herself relax slightly. Ranger sensed the change and sat down, leaning against her leg. Crawford walked over. "Are you okay, Lieutenant?" "I've been through worse," Sarah said. But her hands were shaking now as the adrenaline wore off. She'd been in firefights, had cleared buildings full of enemy combatants, had jumped out of planes and fast-roped from helicopters. But this had been different. She'd been helpless, unable to fight back without making things worse. "You handled that perfectly," Crawford said gently. "I know it didn't feel like it, but you did. If you'd escalated, if you'd fought back physically, Dwyer would have used it against you. You stayed calm, documented everything, and waited for the right moment. That takes real discipline." "I wanted to break his arm," Sarah admitted. Crawford smiled slightly. "I'm sure you could have. But you didn't. That shows character." Agent Chen joined them. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I'm going to need a formal statement from you. And I'd like your permission to use your case as the centerpiece of our investigation. With a decorated veteran as the victim, this gets attention. It might encourage others to come forward." Sarah nodded. "Whatever you need. Just, can we do it tomorrow? I really need to get to my father's ranch. I haven't seen him in 8 months." "Of course," Chen said. "But I should warn you, this is going to get public attention. Once the media finds out a Navy SEAL was assaulted by a corrupt small-town police chief, it's going to be a big story." "I don't want attention," Sarah said quietly. "I just want justice." "You'll get both," Chen promised. Sarah packed up her belongings, loaded Ranger back into the truck, and finally continued her journey south. As she drove through the darkness, she couldn't stop replaying the evening's events in her mind. She'd faced enemies in combat zones who wanted to kill her. But this had felt worse somehow. Because Dwyer was supposed to be on her side. He was supposed to protect people, not victimize them. And he'd targeted her specifically because she was a woman, because he thought she was weak and helpless. He had no idea who he'd been dealing with. But he was about to find out. And so was everyone else in Millbrook. Sarah spent the next 3 days at her father's ranch, trying to decompress. Her father, James Mitchell, was 72 years old, a retired Marine who'd served in Vietnam. He lived alone on 200 acres of Texas scrubland, raising a few head of cattle and keeping to himself. When Sarah told him what had happened in Millbrook, his face had gone dangerously quiet. "You should have called me," he'd said. "I would have driven up there." "And done what, Dad?" "Made it worse." Sarah shook her head. "It's being handled the right way now. The FBI's investigating. Dwyer's suspended. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The story broke on the second day. Someone had leaked it to the media, probably the FBI, using it to put pressure on Millbrook's mayor. The headlines were everywhere. Navy SEAL assaulted by small-town police chief. Decorated veteran targeted in corruption scandal. Female SEAL stands up to corrupt cops. Sarah's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanted interviews. Veterans organizations wanted to honor her. Even some politicians reached out, offering support and demanding investigations. Sarah ignored most of it. But she did agree to one interview, with a veteran journalist who specialized in military stories and had a reputation for fairness. If she was going to tell her story, it would be on her terms. The interview took place at her father's ranch. The journalist, a woman named Catherine Price, asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. "What went through your mind when Officer Dwyer threatened your dog?" Catherine asked. Sarah thought carefully before responding. "Ranger saved my life in Afghanistan. Multiple times. He's not just a pet, he's my brother in arms. When Dwyer threatened to have him shot just to prove his authority, I realized this wasn't about law enforcement. It was about power and control. Dwyer was a bully with a badge." "Some people are saying you overreacted," Catherine said carefully. "That you should have just complied with his orders and sorted it out later." "I did comply," Sarah said firmly. "I gave him my license. I let him search my truck. I allowed him to handcuff me, even though I'd done nothing wrong. The only thing I didn't do was let him shoot my dog for no reason. If that's overreacting, then I guess I'm guilty." The interview aired that evening. Sarah watched it at her father's house, Ranger lying at her feet. "You did good," her father said. "You told the truth without getting emotional. That's important." But Sarah felt exhausted. She'd spent 12 years proving herself in one of the most demanding military roles in the world. And now she was having to prove herself all over again, this time to the American public. The next morning, Agent Chen called. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I need you to come back to Millbrook. We're interviewing witnesses, and your presence might encourage others to come forward." Sarah didn't want to go back. She wanted to stay at the ranch, work with her father's cattle, and forget about Millbrook entirely. But Chen was right, if her case could help expose the full extent of the corruption, she had an obligation to help. She drove back to Millbrook 2 days later. The town looked different now. News vans lined Main Street. Reporters stood outside the police station. The whole place felt tense and divided. The FBI had set up a temporary office in the county courthouse. When Sarah arrived, she found Agent Chen coordinating with Sheriff Reeves and several other federal agents. Thank you for coming, Chen said. We've had 17 people come forward in the past 3 days with complaints about Chief Dwyer and his officers. Your case gave them courage to speak up. 17. Sarah repeated. In just 3 days. And we think there are more, Chen said grimly. Some people are still afraid to come forward. Dwyer had a lot of power in this town. Over the next hours, Sarah listened to testimony from other victims. A black man who'd been stopped and searched 4 times in 2 years, always released without charges but always missing cash from his wallet afterward. A Hispanic woman whose car had been impounded on false charges, costing her a week's wages to get it back. An elderly couple who'd been threatened with arrest when they questioned why they were being searched. The pattern was clear: Dwyer targeted vulnerable people who were unlikely to fight back. Out-of-towners who'd move on rather than pursue complaints. Minorities who'd learned not to trust the system. Poor people who couldn't afford lawyers. He'd just made one critical mistake: he'd targeted Sarah Mitchell, someone with the resources, credibility, and determination to see this through. During a break, Officer Morton approached Sarah. He'd been cooperating fully with the investigation, providing documentation and testimony about Dwyer's activities. Lieutenant Mitchell, he said quietly. I want to apologize again. I should have stopped what was happening to you. I should have stopped all of it, years ago. Why didn't you? Sarah asked. Not accusingly, she genuinely wanted to understand. Morton sat down heavily. Fear. Cowardice. I told myself I was just following orders, that it wasn't my responsibility. But that's not true. I saw what was happening, and I looked away because it was easier. He looked up at her. You served overseas, right? In combat? Sarah nodded. Did you ever see good people do nothing while bad things happened? Yes, Sarah admitted. I saw it in villages we worked with. People who knew where the enemy was hiding but were too afraid to speak up. I used to judge them for it. But then I'd think about what would happen to them if they talked: their families murdered, their homes burned. Fear is powerful. That's what it was like here, Morton said. Not as extreme, obviously. But Dwyer controlled everything. Jobs, reputations, safety. If you crossed him, your life in Millbrook became hell. He paused. I know that doesn't excuse what I did. Or didn't do. No, Sarah agreed. It doesn't excuse it. But you're trying to make it right now. That counts for something. The investigation continued for 2 weeks. Agent Chen's team discovered that Dwyer and the mayor had been running their scheme for at least 5 years. They'd stolen an estimated $300,000 in cash and property from travelers. They'd filed false reports, planted evidence in at least a dozen cases, and systematically violated the civil rights of hundreds of people. The mayor was arrested. So was Dwyer, along with 2 other officers who'd been directly involved. Morton was given immunity in exchange for his testimony. But Sarah wasn't satisfied. Justice for Dwyer wasn't enough. She wanted to make sure this never happened again, in Millbrook or anywhere else. She contacted veterans organizations and civil liberties groups. She spoke at town halls and community meetings. She pushed for reforms: better training for small-town police departments, stronger oversight mechanisms, clearer procedures for filing complaints. Why are you doing all this? Catherine Price asked during a follow-up interview. You got justice for what happened to you. You could move on. Sarah looked at the camera directly. Because I'm not the only victim here. I'm just the one with the platform to speak up. All those other people Dwyer targeted, they deserve justice too. And every small town in America with a corrupt cop needs to see that there are consequences. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I spent 12 years serving my country overseas. Fighting enemies, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. But the truth is, some of the biggest threats to freedom aren't across the ocean. They're right here at home. They're people in positions of power who abuse that power. And if we don't hold them accountable, we're failing the people we're supposed to protect. The interview went viral. Sarah became something of a reluctant celebrity in the veterans community and beyond. But she didn't enjoy the attention. She just wanted to make sure something good came from a bad experience. 6 weeks after her encounter at the gas station, Sarah received a call from the Department of Justice. They wanted her to testify before a congressional committee about police corruption in small towns. They wanted to use her case as an example of why federal oversight was necessary. Sarah agreed, despite her reluctance. If her story could lead to real reform, it was worth the discomfort. But there was one more thing she needed to do before she could move forward. One more piece of unfinished business. She needed to go back to Millbrook one final time. Not for the investigation or the media or the politicians. But for herself. To face the place that had tried to break her, and to prove, to herself more than anyone else, that she was unbreakable. 3 months after her encounter with Chief Dwyer, Sarah drove back into Millbrook. This time, she wasn't just passing through. She was there for the trial. The federal courthouse in the county seat was packed. Victims filled the gallery, people who'd been harassed, robbed, and intimidated by Dwyer and his corrupt officers. Media sat in the press section. And Sarah sat in the front row, Ranger at her feet. The judge had made a special exception to allow the service dog in the courtroom. Dwyer sat at the defense table, looking smaller than Sarah remembered. Without his badge and uniform, without the authority of his position, he was just a middle-aged man facing serious consequences for his actions. The trial lasted 4 days. Sarah testified on the second day, walking the jury through everything that had happened at the gas station. She was calm, factual, and detailed. She'd testified in military hearings before, and she knew how to present information clearly. The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she'd overreacted to a routine traffic stop. Lieutenant Mitchell, the attorney said, "Isn't it true that you have extensive combat training? That you're trained to respond to threats with force?" "That's correct," Sarah said. "So when Officer Dwyer approached you, didn't your training kick in? Didn't you perceive a threat where there wasn't one?" Sarah looked at the attorney steadily. "My training taught me to assess threats accurately. Officer Dwyer was a threat, not because he was doing his job, but because he was abusing his authority. There's a difference between a legitimate police stop and what happened to me." "But you admit you were trained to fight, to use violence when necessary." "I was trained to use appropriate force in appropriate situations," Sarah corrected. "I was also trained to exercise restraint, to de-escalate situations, to protect innocent people. Which is exactly what I did. I didn't resist when Officer Dwyer handcuffed me illegally. I didn't fight back when he assaulted me. I only intervened when he threatened to shoot my service dog for no reason. If you think protecting a decorated military working dog from being killed unnecessarily is overreacting, then I can't help you." The courtroom murmured with approval. The defense attorney moved on quickly. Other witnesses testified about their experiences with Dwyer. A pattern emerged of systematic abuse, targeting vulnerable people who were unlikely to fight back. The evidence was overwhelming. Officer Morton testified as well. He was nervous, but he told the truth about everything he'd witnessed. His testimony was damning, an insider confirming what the victims had been saying all along. On the 4th day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Dwyer guilty on all counts: civil rights violations, theft under color of authority, assault, conspiracy, and more. The maximum sentence was 20 years in federal prison. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, Sarah stayed in the area, helping Agent Chen wrap up loose ends of the investigation. The mayor had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Dwyer and the other corrupt officers in exchange for a reduced sentence. The entire Millbrook Police Department was being reorganized under Sheriff Reeves's supervision. Sarah also did something she hadn't expected: she started meeting with the community. She spoke at the local high school about service and integrity. She met with the town council about police reform. She even had coffee with Morton and his wife, listening to their plans for the future. Morton had resigned from the police force and was going back to school to become a teacher. "I thought about what you said," Morton told her. "About making things right. I realized I can't do that as a cop. I don't trust myself in that role anymore. But maybe I can help kids understand the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Sarah respected that. It took courage to admit you weren't suited for something and to choose a different path. The day of sentencing arrived. Sarah was back in the courtroom, along with many of the victims. The judge allowed several people to make victim impact statements before pronouncing sentence. An elderly woman spoke about how Dwyer had stolen money from her during a traffic stop, money she'd been saving to help pay for her grandchild's medical treatment. A young black man described being stopped and humiliated regularly, making him afraid to drive through his own hometown. A Hispanic family talked about living in fear, knowing that if they complained about Dwyer, they'd face retaliation. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood at the podium, Ranger beside her, and looked directly at Dwyer. "Your Honor," she began, "I've served my country for 12 years. I've been in combat zones where the enemy wanted to kill me. I've faced danger, violence, and fear. But I always knew who the enemy was. They wore different uniforms, spoke different languages, had different goals." She paused. "What Officer Dwyer did to me was worse than anything I faced overseas. Because he was supposed to be on my side. He wore the same flag on his uniform that I wore. He took an oath to protect and serve. And he betrayed that oath. I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm trained to handle threats. But most of Dwyer's victims weren't. They were ordinary people, just trying to get through their days. They couldn't fight back. They couldn't defend themselves. And Dwyer knew that. He targeted the vulnerable specifically because they were vulnerable." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "I don't believe in revenge. I believe in justice. And I believe in consequences. Officer Dwyer needs to face consequences for what he did, not just to punish him, but to send a message. A message that nobody is above the law. That authority comes with responsibility. And that when you abuse your power, you lose it." She glanced at the victims in the gallery. These people deserve justice. They deserve to feel safe in their own community. And they deserve to know that when they speak up about wrongdoing, they'll be believed and supported. She looked back at Dwyer. "I don't hate you, Officer Dwyer. But I will never forgive what you did. Not just to me, but to all these people. You had a chance to be a protector, and you chose to be a predator. Now you have to live with that choice." She sat down. The courtroom was silent. The judge took a moment before speaking. "Mr. Dwyer, I've presided over many cases in my career. But this one particularly disturbs me. You were given authority to protect your community, and you used it to victimize the most vulnerable. You betrayed your oath, your badge, and every principle of justice. Taking into account the severity of your crimes, the number of victims, and the breach of public trust, I'm sentencing you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You're also ordered to pay full restitution to your victims, and you're permanently barred from working in law enforcement in any capacity." Dwyer showed no emotion. He'd known this was coming. But several people in the gallery began crying, tears of relief, of vindication, of justice finally being served. After the sentencing, Sarah walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. Media waited, but she'd already decided she wasn't giving any more interviews. She'd said what she needed to say. Agent Chen found her in the parking lot. "You did good work here, Lieutenant. Because of you, 17 other victims got justice. And hundreds of travelers will be safer because this department is being reformed." "I just did what needed to be done," Sarah said. "That's what heroes say," Chen replied with a smile. Look, I know you're planning to head back to your father's ranch. But I wanted to ask if you'd consider doing some consulting work for us. Training programs for federal agents on recognizing and investigating police corruption. Your perspective would be invaluable. Sarah considered it. She'd been trying to figure out what to do with her post-military life. She'd left the SEALs because 12 years of combat had taken its toll. But maybe she could still serve, just in a different way. Let me think about it, she said. Take your time, Chen said. The offer stands. Sarah drove out of Millbrook that afternoon, Ranger in the passenger seat, the Texas sun setting behind them. In her rearview mirror, she could see the town growing smaller. A town that had tried to break her and had failed. A town that was now changing because she'd refused to be broken. 6 months later, Sarah was indeed working with the FBI, training agents and developing programs to combat police corruption. She split her time between her father's ranch and various FBI offices around the country. Ranger went everywhere with her, a reminder of where she'd been and what she'd overcome. She also started a non-profit organization to help veterans and others who faced abuse from corrupt law enforcement. The organization provided legal assistance, documentation support, and advocacy. It was funded by donations and staffed largely by volunteers, many of them veterans who understood what it meant to fight for justice. One day, she received a letter forwarded from the FBI. It was from a young woman who'd been stopped by a corrupt officer in a different small town, had fought back legally, and had won her case. She'd been inspired by Sarah's story. Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference, the letter read. Thank you for not backing down. And thank you for proving that women are just as strong as men, even when the world tells us we're not. Sarah kept that letter on her desk. It reminded her why she kept doing this work, even when it was exhausting and frustrating. Because justice mattered. Truth mattered. And standing up to bullies, even bullies with badges, mattered. On the 1-year anniversary of her encounter with Dwyer, Sarah returned to Millbrook one final time. The town had changed significantly. Sheriff Reeves had cleaned up the police department, hiring new officers and implementing strict oversight procedures. The community had come together, determined to make sure corruption never took root again. Sarah stopped at the same gas station where it had all begun. It looked different now, new owners, fresh paint, updated security cameras. But she could still see herself standing there a year ago, facing down Dwyer, refusing to back down. She filled up her tank, Ranger waiting patiently beside her. As she was about to leave, a young officer pulled up, one of the new hires Sheriff Reeves had brought in. "Excuse me, ma'am," the officer said politely. "Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. Saw you have out-of-state plates." Sarah smiled. "Everything's fine, officer. Just passing through." "Have a safe trip," the officer said, and drove on. It was such a small interaction, so routine. But to Sarah, it represented everything they'd fought for. A police officer doing his job properly, with courtesy and professionalism. No harassment, no intimidation, no abuse of power. Just protection and service. As Sarah drove away from Millbrook for the last time, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The corrupt cops who'd bullied a stranger and her German shepherd had learned a hard lesson. And so had the system that had protected them. Nobody was above the law. Not even those sworn to enforce it. And when you underestimated Sarah Mitchell, decorated Navy SEAL, protector of the vulnerable, fighter for justice, you did so at your own peril. She was exactly who she appeared to be. And she was exactly who they should have feared all along.